Hi, everybody. Welcome to another English class here on verbling.com. My name is Lisa, and I'm one of the English teachers here at Verbling. And in this hour, we're going to be having a reading class. So if you have a reservation for this hour, you can use it now. If you don't have a reservation, you don't need one. You just have to wait a minute, and when you see the Join Class button, then you can join the class. You do need to be a Verbling member, though, so if you're not a Verbling member right now, you can do a free trial first to see if you like taking the classes and if you can use this service. You can do that on the website. Also, you can become a member. If you just know you want to become a member, just pay $45 per month, and then you get to take unlimited classes. That means you get to take as many classes as you want. So we have some students who take several classes during a day. Some people take classes just when they can. It just depends on you and your schedule. So hi, Greg. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Happy New Year.
Yeah, happy New Year too.
Did you have a good vacation? Did you have vacation time?
Well, actually, it was good. It was nice. I have the family, not at the New Year, but before that, so it was quite cool.
Okay, cool. So you're in London, right?
No, in Hull.
Where?
Hull, in Hull. In Hull.
Oh, okay. All right. So, welcome then. Wait, were you in London before?
No, never. I have never visited the city.
But you're in England.
Yeah.
Okay, just not London, but you're in England. Okay. So did your family come from Poland to see you, or they are there with you, or did you go to Poland?
Actually, my father and my mother is in the UK, and
Oh, okay.
my sister was in Germany, so she come from Germany here, and my
Ah.
brother was in Poland.
Oh, nice. Okay, good. You had a little visit. Great.
Yeah.
So how far away from London are you? Because I'm not familiar with that town.
So the London is on south, and this is actually north of
Oh.
England. So
Oh,
quite
okay.
a couple. I don't know how many hours. Someone told me, I think, but probably more than a 2
More than
hours.
2 or 3 hours. Okay. All right. Good. All right. How's the weather there? Is it getting really gray and rainy and stuff?
Actually, it is
Cool.
quite windy, and I have a draft because the window in this room is not really airtight, so it was quite ridiculous because the radiator is hot, but it's quite cold here.
Oh no.
Yeah, you cannot touch really the radiator, but actually, if you come close to the window, it's
Yeah.
like if I was outside.
Outside. Oh, you have a draft. Yeah, we call that a draft when the wind is coming in through the window. Yeah. Okay, Slavik, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year too.
Okay. And Slavik, where are you?
Sorry?
Where are you living right now?
I live in Krakow in Poland.
In Poland too. Okay. All right, Krakow. Okay, you got 2 people from Poland so far. So we'll see who else. We'll see if anybody else joins us, but we can go ahead and start our reading here. You never know with verbling classes who's going to show up to the class, even though people make a reservation. Some people have other things that come up and they have to do other things. So let's just go ahead and get started, and if some other people join us, which they might, then we will add them in. This article I got from npr.org, which is the website for the National Public Radio, which is one of the main radio stations that's a national radio station here in the United States. And I like to share this website with students because it's also a good website to go to later if you're looking for interesting content. And what's cool about it is because it's for the radio, they actually have a lot of interviews and programs, and you can listen to the story and also read along. So this is actually a listening story that you can listen to for 7 minutes, but we're just going to read a little bit about the article here. So we're going to read together, and let me put it on the document there. All right, so it's called The Doctor Who Championed Hand Washing and Briefly Saved Lives. Do you guys know the word championed? Is that familiar with you? Greg, do you understand that word? The doctor who championed. If you champion something, do you know what that means?
Could you explain?
Okay.
I can only guess. We know what I'm talking. It is this text, but I'm not sure exact.
Okay. Yeah. Slavic, how about you? Do you have
I
an
don't
idea?
know. I don't know.
Good. All right. So the doctor who championed. So if you champion something, you're supporting it. You're for it. Another word would be promoting. You know, if you promote an idea or a practice or a strategy or something, you champion it. You want everybody else to do it. You're like a main supporter of this idea. Okay. So he was telling. So he's a doctor, and he was telling everybody, you know, how important hand washing was, and then he briefly saved lives. So briefly refers to a short. We're going to figure out why it was only a short amount of time. Okay, I'll get started. This is the story of a man whose ideas could have saved a lot of lives and spared countless numbers of women and newborns feverish and agonizing deaths. You'll notice I said could have. The year was 1846, and our would-be hero was a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis. Okay, Greg, we'll just do a little bit at a time here. So go ahead and read that part.
Okay. The doctor who championed hand washing and briefly saved lives. This is the story of a man whose ideas could have saved a lot of lives and spared countless numbers of women and newborns feverish and agonizing deaths. You will notice I said could have. The year 1836, and our would-be hero was a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis.
Okay. So this is the story of a man whose ideas, so his, things that he was thinking about, came up with, could have. So could have means they didn't necessarily, but they could have. And of course, save a lot of lives, and spared. So to spare somebody something means, to spare somebody pain or suffering means they don't have to go through that. So if people would have, started washing their hands earlier, this idea of these deaths, agonizing deaths, and the people getting sick, they could have been spared this experience. So that means they wouldn't have had that experience. So he's talking about countless numbers of women. So countless just means so many you can't even count. So lots and lots of women could have been spared. And the newborns, the new babies that were being born, they had feverish and agonizing deaths. So feverish meaning having a high temperature, having a fever, and agonizing describes the type of death. So agonizing, you just feel terrible. They were very sick, and then they would die, after having a child. And again, could have. Let's see, would-be hero. So a would-be hero is the person that would be if, so he could have been the hero. So that's what we're talking about. So Semmelweis was a man of his time, according to Justin Lessler, an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. It was a time Lessler describes as the start of the golden age of the physician-scientist, when physicians were expected to have scientific training. So, doctors like Semmelweis were no longer thinking of illness as an imbalance caused by bad air or evil spirits. They looked instead to anatomy. Autopsies became more common, and doctors got interested in numbers and collecting data. Okay, Slavic.
Okay. Semmelweis was a man of his time. According to Justin Lessler, an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, it was a time Lessler describes as the start of the golden age of the physician-scientist, when physicians were expected to have scientific training. So doctors like Semmelweis were no longer thinking of illness as an imbalance caused by bad air or evil spirits. They looked instead to anatomy. Autopsies became more common, and doctors got interested in numbers and collecting data.
Good. All right, so he was a man of his time, which means he just was doing the types of things that were popular at his time, the time he was living in. All right, so he was an assistant professor. All right, he describes him, let's see, the start of the golden age of something. So whenever we describe a time period as the golden age, it means it was a very popular time for something. So this was when it became popular to become a scientist as a physician. So a physician means doctor, and before that the doctors were not really paying so much attention to science, but now they were, and they were expected, so people thought they should have scientific training. So training is your education. So you get trained, you train to understand things excuse me, in a scientific way, not just thinking that you're sick because you have bad air or there are evil spirits or something like that. So they started to look instead to anatomy, so which is understanding the body, the different systems of the body. When you when somebody dies, and then you kind of look at their body to see what happened, why did they die, what was the cause of the death. So you perform an autopsy, and so they learned more about the body that way, and they got interested in collecting a bunch of data or data. So you can say that whatever way, data or data. Okay, the young Dr. Semmelweis was no exception. When he showed up for his new job in the maternity clinic at the General Hospital in Vienna, he started collecting some data of his own. Semmelweis wanted to figure out why so many women in maternity wards were dying from puerperal fever, commonly known as childbed fever. He studied 2 maternity wards in the hospital. One was staffed by all male doctors and medical students, and the other was staffed by female midwives, and he counted the number of deaths on each ward. Okay, Greg.
Okay, the young Dr. Semmelweis was no exception. When he showed up for his new job in the maternity clinic at General Hospital in Vienna, he started collecting some data of his own. Semmelweis wanted to figure out why so many women in maternity wards were dying from I don't know how to pronounce it. Purple, thank you, fever, commonly known as childbed fever. He studied 2 maternity wards in the hospital. One was staffed by all male doctors and medical students, and the other was staffed by female midwives. And he counted the number of deaths on each ward.
Good. All right, so he was no exception. So this goes along with the idea that people were becoming more interested in scientific training, and he was no exception. So that means he also wanted to start collecting information and data and trying to understand things in a more scientific way rather than like based on religious ideas and things like that. Okay, so he showed up. When we say, this is a phrasal verb here, when you show up for your new job, it means that's when you come to your new job. So you go to your job for the first time, you show up there, and it was at a maternity clinic. So maternity meaning dealing with moms who are pregnant, they're having babies, and so he started to collect. So he started collecting some data of his own. he wanted to figure out. So to figure out means to understand, to discover why so many of these women were dying. And this is a type of fever that was happening after childbirth, and they called it childbed fever. So they were having their babies, and then they were dying of this particular fever. So what he was doing, he was studying two different wards. A ward is like an area in the hospital, like maybe on one floor and then on another floor. We call those wards in the hospital. And one was staffed by. So to mean staffed by means the staff was made of men, all male doctors and male medical students. So those were the people who were working there. And the other one had female midwives. So they were not doctors, they were not physicians, they were midwives who that's the only thing they do is deliver babies and care for moms and stuff. And he was counting the numbers. So he was doing his research by seeing, how many people were dying on each ward. When Semmelweis crunched the numbers, he discovered that women in the clinic staffed by doctors and medical students died at a rate nearly 5 times higher than women in the midwives' clinic. But why? Semmelweis went through the differences between the two wards and started ruling out ideas. Right away, he discovered a big difference between the two clinics. Okay, Slavik.
When Semmelweis crunched the numbers, he discovered that women in the clinic staffed by doctors and medical students died at a rate nearly 5 times higher than women in the midwives' clinic. But why? Semmelweis went through the differences between the two wards and started ruling out ideas. Right away, he discovered a big difference between the two clinics.
Okay. So to crunch numbers, this is when we're talking about research data, information, it means to look at the numbers. When you crunch them, it means you're just looking at them, comparing them, trying to see if there's a pattern or some information in the numbers. So he's looking at the numbers. And so he discovered that the ones who were in the ward that had the doctors and the medical students, they were dying. And we say at a rate nearly 5 times higher. So much, the rate means how often they were dying. So a lot more often this was happening than when they were working with the midwives. Semmelweis, he went through the differences. So to go through, that's the phrasal verb there. To go through the differences means to look at them. He's comparing them, and so he's looking through the data and comparing them, and he started to understand the differences, and he started to rule out ideas. So when you rule out something, you say, okay, it cannot be this. So it can't be because of this, or it can't be because of that, and that's what it means to rule out a reason for something or an idea. Right away, he discovered a big difference between the two clinics. In the midwives' clinic, women gave birth on their sides. In the doctor's clinic, women gave birth on their backs. So he had women in the doctor's clinic give birth on their sides. The result, Lessler says, was no effect. Then Semmelweis noticed that whenever someone on the ward died of childbed fever, a priest would walk slowly through the doctor's clinic, past the women's bed, with an attendant ringing a bell. This time, Semmelweis theorized that the priest and the bell ringing so terrified the women after birth that they developed a fever, got sick, and died. Okay. Slavik.
I think it's Greg.
It's Greg's turn. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, Greg, sorry. I got confused.
Okay. Right away, he discovered a big difference between the two clinics. In the midwives' clinics, women gave birth on their sides. In the doctor's clinic, women gave birth on their backs. So he had women in the doctor's clinics give birth on their sides. The result, Lessler says, was no effect. Then Semmelweis noticed that whenever someone on the ward died of childbed fever, a priest would walk slowly through the doctor's clinic, past the women's beds, with an attendant ringing a bell. This time, voice theorized, the- theorized, sorry,
Theorized, yeah.
theorized that the priest and the bell ringing so terrified that women after birth that they developed a fever, got sick, and died.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so right away, sometimes you might also hear straight away. So it means just very soon. So once he started looking at the differences, he started to discover a couple of them. So the first one he tried was the idea of giving birth on their side. So turning over on, we say use the preposition on your side. But that didn't really make a difference. So it didn't matter if the women were on their sides or on their backs. It didn't make a difference. So the result was no effect. So no difference, basically. Then he noticed, so he observed, you could say, or he watched and he saw that the priest would come, and with this person, an attendant is somebody who's with the priest, so like a helper, somebody like that, and this person was ringing the bell. So he theorized. When you theorize, it means you make a theory. You say maybe this is the reason why this is happening. So he had a theory that the women were terrified. They were scared of the bell and seeing the priest, and that's why they developed, or that's why they got a fever, got sick, and then died. So these are two theories that he tried out. So Semmelweis had the priest change his route and ditch the bell. Lessler says it had no effect. By now, Semmelweis was frustrated. He took a leave from his hospital duties and traveled to Venice. He hoped the break and a good dose of art would clear his head. When Semmelweis got back to the hospital, some sad but important news was waiting for him. One of his colleagues, a pathologist, had fallen ill and died. It was a common occurrence, according to Jacqueline Duffin, who teaches the history of medicine at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Okay, Slavic.
So Semmelweis had the priest change his route and ditch the bell. Lesser says it had no effect. By now Semmelweis was frustrated. He took a leave from his hospital duties and traveled to Venice. He hoped the break and a good dose of art would clear his head. When Semmelweis got back to the hospital, some sad but important news was waiting for him. One of his colleagues, a pathologist, had fallen ill and died. It was a common occurrence, according to Jacqueline Duffin, who teaches the history of medicine at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario.
All right, so he had the priest, so that means he told the priest to do something different. So he told him to change his route, so the way he was walking through the ward, and to ditch the bell. So this is kind of an informal way to say it, but it means to get rid of. So if you ditch something, it means to get rid of it. So to leave the bell, no longer carry the bell, don't ring the bell. So ditch the bell, so that they don't have that to listen to. But it wasn't working. It had no effect. So he became frustrated. Frustrated is like, just he can't understand why he can't figure this out. So he was very frustrated. So he took a leave. To take a leave, you could also say to take a leave of absence. We say sometimes absence, which means you leave for a little. You go on vacation, you go on holiday, to take some time away to clear your head, that kind of thing. So he traveled to Venice in Italy, and he hoped that the break and a good dose of art. A good dose means a little bit. When usually you talk about medicine, you get a dose, like you have to take 2 pills in the morning. That's a dose. But just a little bit of art would clear his head, so help him think more clearly and figure out what is really going on. Why are these women dying? Okay, so he got back to the hospital. His friend had died, one of his colleagues or co-workers. A pathologist is a doctor who studies the pathology of an illness. So what is the cause of the illness? So this person had died, which was a common occurrence back then. It happened quite often. So something that's common happens often. And occurrence is event or something that happens. So People dying like that happened quite a bit. This often happened to the pathologist, Duffin says. There was nothing new about the way he died. He pricked his finger while doing an autopsy on someone who had died from childbed fever, and then he got very sick himself and died. Semmelweis studied the pathologist's symptoms and realized the pathologist died from the same thing as the women he had autopsied. This was a revelation. Childbed fever wasn't something only women in childbirth got sick from. It was something other people in the hospital could get sick from as well. Okay, hi there, Ken. How are you?
Yes, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Would you like to read?
Okay, from Samuel?
This often happened
Okay.
to the pathologists.
Okay, this often happened to the pathologist. Duffin says there was nothing new about the way he died. He pricked his finger while doing an autopsy on someone who had died from childbed fever, and then he got very sick himself and died. Semmelweis studied the pathologist's symptoms and realized the pathologist died from the same thing as the women he had autopsied. This was a revelation. Childbed fever wasn't something only women in childbirth got sick from. It was something other people in the hospital could get sick from as well.
Okay. So that was an amazing thing here. Okay, so let's see. This often happened to the pathologist. There was nothing new about the way he died. Okay, so he pricked his finger. When you prick your finger, you take like a little needle and you make a little hole in your finger, and then a little bit of blood comes out. So that happens if you're dealing with sharp objects. You might prick your finger. So that happened to him. And then he died from the same things, which they're calling childbed fever, because they only thought it happened to women who had just had a child. He got very sick and died. But his symptoms, they realized he died from the same thing. Autopsy, Ken, you came a little bit later. Do you know what that means, autopsy?
Probably some type of surgery or something?
Actually, an autopsy is a specialized thing. So when somebody dies, the pathologist, the special doctor who's trying to figure out why the person died, they do an autopsy. It means you're looking at the person, the dead body, to try to figure out what happened. Why did this person die? And this was, back a long time ago, in the late 1900s, in 1846, and I think it was 46. Anyways, this was new for them. They were starting to do autopsies as a new thing. This is done now regularly, like if somebody dies, especially like in an accident or suspicious circumstances or something, they'll perform an autopsy. So it's basically looking at the dead body.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can't save this person. They're already dead, and you're just kind of trying to understand what happened. Did their liver fail, or some, what was, did they have a disease or something? And this is a time period when they were just learning about this. So they didn't realize, that he could get sick from working on dead people. So this was a revelation. So a revelation, it means to reveal. So it's like a new discovery. It's like, whoa, this isn't something they didn't even understand before. So childbed fever wasn't just for women. After childbirth, another person could get sick and have the same symptoms and die. So that was a revelation, something really new for them that they didn't know before. But it still didn't answer Semmelweis's original question: why were more women, dying from childbed fever in the doctor's clinic than in the midwife's clinic? Duffin says the death of the pathologist offered him a clue. The big difference between the doctor's ward and the midwife's ward is that the doctors were doing autopsies and the midwives weren't, she says. Okay, Greg.
Okay, but I still didn't answer Semmelweis' original questions. Why were more women dying from childbed fever in the doctor's clinic than in the midwives' clinics. Tappin says the death of the pathologist offered him a clue. The big difference between the doctor's ward and the midwife's ward is that the doctors were doing autopsy and the midwives weren't, she says.
Yeah. So, Ken, you came just a little bit later. So, in the beginning, we're talking about this doctor who was trying to figure out why the women who were on the ward, like the floor where the doctors were helping them, were dying 5 times more often than the women who were having children and they were being attended by midwives. And so he tried a couple of ideas, but they didn't make any difference. So this was a new clue for him. That's kind of the idea here. So the main clue that he got from this is that the doctors were doing autopsies. So they weren't just helping these women deliver babies, but when one of them would die, they would go and do an autopsy to try to understand more about the disease, the illness that they died from. All right, and the midwives, they weren't doing that. They were not doctors. They're not physicians, so they just helped just in childbirth and taking care of the baby. So they were not, dealing or handling, they weren't dealing with or handling dead bodies of sick people, people who had died of an illness. So Semmelweis hypothesized that there were cadaverous particles, little pieces of corpse that students were getting on their hands from the cadavers they dissected. And when they delivered the babies, these particles would get inside the women who would develop the disease and die. If Semmelweis's hypothesis was correct, getting rid of those cadaverous particles should cut down on the death rate from childbed fever. Okay, Slavic.
So Semmelweis hypnotized that there were cadaverous particles, little pieces of corpse, that students were getting on their hands from the cadavers they dissected. And when they delivered the babies, those particles would get inside the women who would develop the disease and die. If Semmelweis hypnotizes were correct, getting rid of those cadaverous particles should cut down on the death rate from childbed fever.
Okay, so let's say this word again. This is hypothesized.
Hypothesized.
So to hypothesize means to make a hypothesis, which is kind of what we call an educated guess. So in the scientific way of doing research, that's part of the scientific method where you make a hypothesis based on the information that you have, and you have to test your hypothesis to see if it's right. So he thought, this was like his theory, his idea. Let's see, a couple of words here. Cadaverous. So a dead person we have a couple of words to describe a dead person. One is a corpse. So a corpse is a dead body, and a cadaver is also a dead body. So 2 different words mean basically the same thing. And so he thought there were cadaverous particles. A particle is a little piece of something, speak of particles of bread or pieces of bread, like crumbs, things like that, but also particles coming from the dead body. So something coming off while the student, had their hands on the cadavers while they were doing the autopsy. So to dissect, that's what you do when you do an autopsy. So maybe in a science class when you were younger, maybe you did a frog. Usually here in the United States, you either dissect a frog or a little pig, like a baby pig, and they're dead, and then you open them up. That's what dissection is when you open them up, and then you get to learn about the nervous system and the bones and this kind of stuff. So this is how they were learning about anatomy back then, a long time ago, and they were opening up these cadavers. They were dissecting them. And so he was thinking that because they were doing this, maybe their hands, they didn't have gloves and stuff back then, they had these particles on their hands, and when they would help deliver the baby, they would get inside the woman or the women when they were in childbirth there. And maybe that was the reason why they would develop the disease and then, of course, die. So if his hypothesis was correct, then what would be the solution? Would be to get rid of those cadaverous particles. So to make sure that the doctor doesn't have any particles on his hands. And this would cut down on, so that means that would lower the death rate. So less people would die because they wouldn't be getting this disease passing from the dead bodies to the women. So he ordered his medical staff to start cleaning their hands and instruments, not just with soap, but with a chlorine solution. Chlorine, as we know today, is about the best disinfectant there is. Semmelweis didn't know anything about germs. He chose the chlorine because he thought it would be the best way to get rid of any smell left behind by those little bits of corpse. And when he imposed this, the rate of childbed fever fell dramatically. Okay, Ken.
Yeah, so he ordered his medical staff to start cleaning their hands and instruments, not just with soap, but with chlorine solution. Chlorine, as we know today, is about the best disinfectant there is. Samuels didn't know anything about germs. He chose the chlorine because he thought it would be the best way to get rid of any smell left behind by those little bits of corpse. And when he imposed this, the rate of childbed fever fell dramatically.
All right, so he ordered. So he was kind of the boss there, I guess. And so to give an order means to tell your staff what they have to do. So he ordered them, his staff, to start washing their hands, start cleaning their hands, and the instruments that they used, any of the little utensils or something that they would use, and not just with soap, but with some kind of chlorine solution. So we have a solution here means, it's not just straight chlorine probably, but maybe mixed with some water or some other chemicals. So it's a solution made of chlorine. And then there's a little break here. This sentence, we know now, today, of course, that chlorine is the best disinfectant. So to get rid of germs, you disinfect places if people are sick, like in hospitals or something, they clean with a chlorine solution to get rid of germs. But at this point, they didn't know about germs. They didn't know what germs were, that they caused people to get sick or something like that. So he he decided that this would be the best way to get rid of any smell left behind by those little corpses. So he was just doing it for the smell. So he thought the soap was just doing the cleaning, but the smell of, after dealing with a dead body, you have a smell on your hands. And so he wanted to get rid of the smell. Well, when he imposed this, so if you're a boss and you impose something on your staff, this means you put into rule, like it's a rule now. You tell people this is what you have to do. And so he imposed this on his staff. And of course, the rate of this childbed fever fell dramatically. So a lot less people died. Dramatically means significantly. What Semmelweis had discovered is something. Hand washing is one of the most important tools in public health. It can keep kids from getting the flu, prevent the spread of disease, and keep infections at bay. You'd think everyone would be thrilled. Semmelweis had solved the problem, but they weren't thrilled. For one thing, doctors were upset because Semmelweis's hypothesis made it look like they were the ones giving childbed fever to the women. Okay, great.
Okay, what Semmelweis had discovered is something that still holds true today. Hand washing is one of the most important tools in public health. It can keep kids from getting the flu, prevent the spread of disease, and keep infections at bay. You would think everyone would be thrilled. Semmelweis had solved the problem, but they weren't thrilled. For one thing, doctors were upset because Semmelweis hypothesis made it look like they were the ones giving childbed fever to the women.
Politics there. All right, so something that still holds true today. So if it still holds true, it means it still is true. So even today we know that washing your hands, or as the noun is hand washing, is an important tool or a method or a strategy for public health. So making sure that the public at large is healthy. And so that means like so that you don't pass one disease or one illness on to another person. So it can keep kids from getting the flu. So when we talk about getting sick, we say we get sick, we get the flu. That means we become sick because of whatever. And so if you can keep somebody from getting the flu, that means you prevent them. So they're not going to get sick. You prevent the spread of disease that way by having people wash their hands. And also it can keep infections at bay. So this is the expression here, to keep something at bay. It means to make sure you don't get it, you know. So it just stays away from you, and so you don't have to worry about it. So it keeps them at bay, and they don't get any worse. If you do have an infection, you can keep washing it, and it won't get any worse, is the idea also. So you would think that everybody would be thrilled, would be excited, would be happy, would like be, yay, we solved the problem. But they weren't. They were upset, so they were kind of angry because his idea was making it look like they were the ones that were responsible. And so that wasn't, they didn't like that idea. Like, how could we be killing these women is kind of the idea. They didn't like to think about that. All right, and Semmelweis was not very tactful. He publicly berated people who disagreed with him and made some influential enemies. Eventually, the doctors gave up the chlorine hand washing, and Semmelweis, he lost his job. Semmelweis kept trying to convince doctors in other parts of Europe to wash with chlorine, but no one would listen to him. Even today, convincing healthcare providers to take hand washing seriously is a challenge. Hundreds of thousands of hospital patients get infections each year, infections that can be deadly and hard to treat. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says hand hygiene is one of the most important ways to prevent these infections. Okay, Slavic?
And Semmelweis was not very tactful. He publicly berated people who disagreed with him and made some influential enemies. Eventually, the doctors gave up the chlorine hand washing, and Semmelweis he lost his job. Semmelweis kept trying to convince doctors in other parts of Europe to wash with chlorine, but no one would listen to him. Even today, convincing healthcare providers to take hand washing seriously is a challenge. Hundreds of thousands of hospital patients get infections each year. Infections that can be deadly and hard to treat. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says hand hygiene is one of the most important ways to prevent these infections.
Good. All right, so he was not very tactful. To be tactful means you know how to talk to people. Yeah, so the opposite of being tactful would be like rude, you know, not very nice, not very helpful. So he didn't really know how to explain this to the doctors. And he publicly berated people who disagreed with him. So if you berate somebody, you call, you know, like you insult them, you know, somebody disagrees with him, he might say, well, he's just an idiot, you know, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So he wasn't very, like, politically correct in terms of how he treated people who disagreed with him, who didn't agree with him. And so therefore he made some enemies. So to make some enemies means you turn people into your enemies. So people don't like you because of the way that you talk to them, or you insult people, that kind of stuff. And they were influential enemies, which means they could get him fired, which is what happened. So people, the doctors, gave up. That means they stopped doing the chlorine hand washing, and he lost his job. So they fired him. He kept trying to convince. So he kept telling people and trying to convince them, to prove to them, to make them believe that this was really, really important. But nobody was listening to him. They would not listen to him. Even today, convincing, making people believe that this is really important is really difficult. It's a serious challenge. It's not easy. Even healthcare providers, so even like nurses and doctors and people who are taking care of other people, don't necessarily believe that hand washing is so important. And because of this, a lot of people are getting infections each year. So they get, they're in the hospital, their patients already in the hospital, and then they get sick because they get another infection or some kind of illness or something because of this idea that the doctors or nurses are not washing their hands, and it's spreading different diseases throughout. And these can be deadly and also hard to treat. So to treat somebody means to try to take care of them, to try to help them get better. That's what doctors and nurses do. They treat patients. So we call this hand hygiene. Hygiene means, being clean. And so the idea of keeping your hands washed and clean, especially if you're going to like make food or help somebody, something like that, touch other people, you want to make sure you wash your hands to prevent. Prevention is so that it doesn't happen. Over the years, Semmelweis got angrier and eventually even strange. There's been speculation he developed a mental condition brought on by possibly syphilis or even Alzheimer's. And in 1865, when he was only 47 years old, Ignaz Semmelweis was committed to a mental asylum. The sad end to the story is that Semmelweis was probably beaten in the asylum and eventually died of sepsis, a potentially fatal complication of an infection in the bloodstream. Basically, it's the same disease Semmelweis fought so hard to prevent in those women who died from childbed fever. Okay, Ken.
Over the years, Samuels got angrier and eventually even strange. There's been speculation he developed a mental condition brought on by possibly syphilis or even Alzheimer's. And in 1865, when he was only 47 years old, Ignaz Samuels was committed to a mental asylum. The sad end to the story is that Samuels was probably beaten in the asylum and eventually died of sepsis, a potentially fatal complication of an infection in the bloodstream. Basically, it's the same disease Samuels fought so hard to prevent in those women who died from childbed fever.
Good. That's called irony. That's ironic. All right, so over the years, he got angrier. So he became madder and madder, angrier and angrier. He just couldn't convince people to wash their hands, and he kind of drove himself crazy. So that eventually, over time, he even became kind of strange, which means a little weird, bizarre. His behavior perhaps was a little strange. You can imagine, people wouldn't believe him. There has been speculation. So speculation is when people speculate. They say, maybe this happened, or maybe that happened, or maybe it was this. So that's what speculation is, when people kind of guess at what might have happened to him. So maybe his condition, he had a mental condition, so mental problems. Maybe he had syphilis and that started the mental problems, or maybe something like what we know as Alzheimer's today. Of course, Alzheimer's didn't exist back then. We didn't call it Alzheimer's, but maybe something like that happened to him. But that's just speculation. It means there's no proof. You're just guessing, really. And if you hear this word speculation in relationship to like a case in the court of law or something, that's just speculation. It means there's no proof. So you can't really use speculation in a court of law to try to convict somebody. You have to have proof. And so there's no proof really what happened to him. But he was very young, only 47 years old, and he was committed to a mental asylum. So if you put a person in a mental asylum or hospital or something, you get committed to it. It means you get put in there. So he was committed by somebody put him in there. They said he's not capable of thinking clearly, that kind of thing. So they put him in a mental asylum, a mental kind of like a hospital, a special place where people who have mental problems live, and they're taken care of there. So it's a sad end, to this story. He was probably beaten in the asylum. So here meaning people hit him, maybe as a punishment or as a way of a treatment, maybe because he was getting crazier and crazier or something like that. So he was probably beaten by the staff there, and then he eventually died of sepsis. So a sepsis is just an infection in your bloodstream. So it's maybe there was a complication that happened, and ironically, it's kind of basically the same disease that he was trying to prevent. He fought so hard to prevent. So he was fighting, meaning he was trying to convince those doctors to wash their hands, and they just didn't believe him. So that's, Ken, you weren't here in the beginning, but that's where the article was, he could have saved more lives, but people didn't believe him. So the title was The Doctor Who Championed Hand Washing. So he's the one who told everybody, hey, you guys, you have to wash your hands. And briefly, he saved lives. So when they were washing their hands, less women were dying. But basically, the doctors didn't believe him. They didn't want to think they were causing these women to die, and so they stopped doing it. So it's kind of a sad story. Had you guys heard about this guy before? Is this something that you've learned about, like in school, or heard along the way in life?
No.
No?
No, but actually it was quite interesting that he discovered what was a simple solution to the really serious problem, and he died in such a strange, circumstances because he invented something, and later he died from similar reason. But actually, what I noticed, because I just look at IMDb website and I see some movies, so the first thing that what I read at the end, I think that would be a good movie about.
Yeah.
But the second thing that I remember from the article, I can imagine the reaction of the priest when he said about his devil, actually we can say Bell, who caused the death.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, Ken, you weren't here in the beginning, but he had two other kind of theories or hypotheses about why these women might be dying in the doctor's ward. And one of them was that the priests were coming around and they were ringing a bell. So maybe that was too terrifying to the women. So he stopped having them ring the bell. And kind of today that sounds like crazy, right? But he didn't know. They didn't have any idea why these women were dying in the doctor's ward, because they had another ward. They weren't dying so much, So, and then the other one was maybe it was because of the birthing position. So the women in the midwives area, they were on their sides, and the one in the doctor's area, the women were giving birth on their backs. So he thought maybe that was the difference. That would be the reason why these women died. But no, that wasn't the reason either. So, it's kind of amazing to think at one point people really didn't know why things were happening. And even now, some people still don't believe that washing your hands is very important, even though I guess, there's enough proof that it is really important. So it's interesting.
To get the idea and how to spread the idea is important. Maybe this kind of thing is still happening. Some excellent idea, but because of the politics or some other issues, that idea that doesn't spread.
Right. Yeah. Hard to change people's minds, kind of, to even when you have proof and even when people are dying. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Slavik, well, what about you? Had you heard about this story, this guy?
No, I've never heard that story before, but I'm really happy that I read it now, and I know what that is very important to wash hand uh, how 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 often is it possible?
Right. Yeah, sometimes, we don't even think about it so much, but especially if you're in a hospital, like a doctor, for example, just imagine how many times he touches a sick patient or deals with some kind of, I don't know, drawing blood or taking somebody's temperature and talking to them, and then if they don't wash their hands, it can really make people sick. So this is really important for um, even recently, there was a recent doctor who did another book, I don't know, here in the United States, and he was trying to convince the surgeons to make sure they washed their hands better, and he was, it was more helpful to save lives and stuff. So even nowadays, still, even though they're supposed to do it, a lot of doctors don't do it. So it's pretty crazy. Ken, here in the United States, if you come to the United States and you go to a restaurant, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to the bathroom, there's a sign up there that tells the employees that they have to wash their hands. Like after going to the bathroom, you have to wash your hands before you go back to work. Does that exist also like in Japan?
No, usually.
No?
Ah, because usually employees use different restroom
Oh,
in
okay.
restaurant. Yeah, maybe they don't use customers kind
Uh-huh.
of separated. Yeah, so I
Oh,
don't know the employees restroom.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And yeah, especially like at a restaurant. Anybody who handles food has to take like a little course, and they have to learn about how important it is to wash their hands
But
after they go to the bathroom, after they
yeah,
touch their hair, after they sneeze, or something like that.
yeah. But I used to work in a the kind of the shop or company who cook the lunchbox.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
yeah, kind of yeah, it was displayed and kind of the soap and sanitation spray or maybe
Yeah.
alcohol or something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, was available for employees.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, you see something like this. Greg, do you see something like this in England when you go to the bathroom?
Yes, that is very common.
Yeah.
I saw it in Poland, I see it in England, so I think most Western countries and East countries you will see this in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a reminder, and when we're in school, when I used to teach children in school, elementary school, trying to help them remember, because it's really hard. Sometimes kids, they go to the bathroom and then they run out, they want to go play or something, but to remind them to wash their hands and make sure they use soap, not just water, and they rub their hands together and that whole kind of thing. So definitely something important, especially doctors. It's kind of amazing to think that doctors still don't think it's so important.
I think they should, I don't know, every day should watch these horrible movies that I presented in the chat room. That would be a good reminder for them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because even today people are still dying of, illnesses, and um, it happens, that's why a lot of people in the United States, they don't want to go to a hospital because they say you get sick in the hospital because of things like this. So, yeah. So wash your hands, everybody. That's the lesson, I guess, today. Okay, well, our time's up. Thanks for coming, everybody, and I hope you learned something new about this guy and this history, but also maybe some new words like autopsy and things like this. So thanks for coming. Have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Bye.
Take care,
much.
Thank you
guys.
very much. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.